exactly expecting the Broncos to make a deep run into the playoffs, but they do have the playoffs kind of on the line when they go into Cincinnati tomorrow. I think there's obviously a lot of backing in scenarios with the Broncos, whether you consider beating a Chiefs team week 18 that's sitting all their starters backing in, or if Cincinnati loses. There's a lot of different scenarios that can get the Broncos in. But ultimately, the best thing to kind of establish yourself, and I get that it's not a winning team, but you go into Cincinnati and you beat that offense. You beat a team that James Palmer talked about it. I talked about it earlier this week. This Chiefs team doesn't want to see Joe Burrow in the playoffs. They don't. Broncos go into Cincinnati tomorrow, beat the Cincinnati Bengals. You do send a message to anybody who might get you round one in the playoffs that we're willing to come into your place and beat you.
Well, given the fact that they're likely going to have to go to Buffalo, right? That's going to be probably not great weather on January 11th, 12th, or 13th, whenever that game is played. If you can go in bad weather and beat Cincinnati, a team with a lot of firepower, sounds a lot like Buffalo, okay, then it gives you hope. If they go out tomorrow, don't look very good offensively, playing in bad weather. Bo Nix struggles again, even though they brought the right footballs and they brought 10 different pair of gloves and all those kind of things, and they were prepared for it this time. And they struggle tomorrow, or they get boat race tomorrow. John, it's going to be hard to spin it when it's time to get ready for heading to Buffalo if you back into the playoffs of like, yeah, they got a chance to go beat the Bills. Based on what? They won't have beaten anybody worth a hoot. They certainly won't have gone on the road in a meaningful game in conditions and done it. And I get that the Bengals, even if they win tomorrow, are still only 8-8. But that offense makes them different. They're not in that same class. I repeatedly go over, right? It's the NFC South. It's the Raiders twice. It's the Jets. It's the Browns and the Colts. The Bengals are better than those teams. They just are. Record-wise, they might not be better than all of them, better than some of those NFC South teams, but they're a better team. It would be the best win of the Broncos season because the Bengals are playing for everything. Their season is on the line. The Buccaneers' season wasn't on the line week 3. They overlooked the Broncos. They beat the Lions the week before, had the Eagles the week after. Classic trap game, and they fell into it. This ain't a trap game for the Bengals. They're going to be ready to go, so it would be the best win of the year for the Broncos. It would start to give me some confidence that, hey, they can make some noise or at least hang in there in the playoffs. And I'm looking to check the final box on this team, and I'm looking to check the final box on Bo Nix, and that is go get me an impressive win. This probably falls into that category.
Oh, yeah, it would be the signature win, obviously. It should have been Mahomes, but I said in that pregame, you got to beat the Chiefs all 60 minutes. That's what I said. And then what happened? They beat them for 59-59.
Well, and everybody focuses on the blocked field goal, and I get it because it's a field goal that you're going to make that 19 out of 20
I've never
times.
seen that, basically. That's how.
I mean, it was like that game was, if you'd been looking at the ESPN thing of like what's the percentage chance of winning, it had to be at 99 at that point because that's almost a gimme type of a field goal. But I keep going back to they had 53 yards of total offense in the second half, 43 of which came on that drive. So they had 10 yards of total offense prior to that in the second half. They had a 14-10 lead throughout that time. They had a chance to make that a 2-score game multiple times, and they couldn't do anything offensively. That's where you lost the game. I get it. You still could have bailed yourself out and won it with a chip shot field goal, but you lost the game because you couldn't put the Chiefs away. You couldn't create any separation. You let it be where, hey, if Mahomes makes one drive, if he makes one play, he's going to beat you. Shockingly, Patrick Mahomes was able to make one drive, make a couple plays, and beat you down the stretch. That's where they lost the game. It wasn't just Alex Forsythe getting run over.
Yeah, it was. But anyways,
no.
With that, but that should have been the Bo signature game because he had the drive at the end of it. With this one, you're going against a guy in Joe Burrow, 39 touchdowns to, 6 interceptions?
He's having an MVP caliber season.
39 TDs, 68.9 completion percentage, 4,229 yards on 557 attempts. It's unreal.
Yeah, I mean, putting up monster numbers. Their offense puts up, seems like 30 every single game. Problem with the Bengals, the reason they're 7-8, they can't stop anybody. Russell Wilson and the Steelers went in there within the last month. He threw for 414 yards and scored 44 points.
And you were running around in your Russell Wilson jersey.
I was. And that jersey's, it's still in the closet. It just hasn't been off the hanger in a while.
I can't believe you bought that. But with this win over the Bengals, what it is yes, their record's 7-8. You think the Bills want to see them in the playoffs?
No.
You think the Ravens want to see them?
No.
Chiefs?
No.
No.
Because they could get hot offensively and come in and beat you because you couldn't stop them.
And that's the whole point is, yes, this team has a losing record. You go in and beat this team, which you and I both agree, this may be the hardest game they've had all year, just looking at everything and how the team's set up. You do send a message to those other teams. You send a message to Buffalo, like you said. The problem there is getting it done, and how do you get it done? Because the Broncos offense, we've seen them score some points this year. Problem is, you scored a lot on Atlanta when Atlanta wasn't scoring. They're scoring a lot of points. That's a bad Atlanta defense. This is a bad Cincinnati defense. But the Falcons aren't scoring, so you're not trading punches with them.
Right.
How do you respond when you're up 21-17, now you're down 24-21, and now you've got to continually kind of hang in there and not let the wheels fall off, getting in a shootout? Because I think they might have to get in a shootout. I don't think the Broncos defense is holding. I get the weather. I don't think they're holding them to 10 points this weekend.
Well, I'm with you. It is a game, if you're going to win it, you got to be able to trade punches, and I think you got to be able to trade punches right out of the gate. If the Broncos fall down 14-0, and it's like, oh my God, we can't stop this Bengals offense, and Denver's had the ball twice and they've gone 3 and out both times, I don't know that they're digging out of that hole at Cincinnati. If they can, get an early score, even if they give one up, then they match it. You're like, okay, it's going to be that kind of day. Who's going to have the ball last kind of a game,
yeah.
Right? I think it's the first quarter. Don't dig yourself a huge hole. That way you can kind of try to dictate, even though the Broncos don't run the football particularly well. You can at least, if you're not down 14-0, 17-0, you can at least try to play the game of, hey, keep Joe Burrow standing on the sideline. If you fall in too big of a hole, you got to start scoring and scoring quickly to catch back up. That's when it can snowball, because then you make mistakes. You give the ball back to them quickly. You have those drives where it's 3 incompletions. You burned a grand total of 22 seconds, and it's your defense is right back on the field again. That's the other reason why I think the first quarter, just don't have it be a buzzsaw. Don't have it be, hey, his team's not ready for prime time. They're not ready for big stage. They're the only game at 2:30 tomorrow, right? It's the 3 games. They're going to be the lone game in that window. Everybody's going to be watching. Just show you're ready for it in the first quarter. I think we'll know by then. I think by 3:15 tomorrow, not saying we'll know if they're going to win, but we'll know if they're going to be in it.
Well, and if you do get down early, you play into the one thing they do well on defense, and that's Trey Hendrickson.
Right.
He leads the league in sacks. So
getting after the passer.
Yeah, and that's the one thing. If you're down 2 scores early, you allow them to do what they do well. One other thing about the Bengals defense, they're bottom in the league. They're 28th in yards per game, 26th in pass yards per game, 21st in rush yards per game, 28th in points per game. They allow 26 points a game. One thing, though, is they're top 10 in turnovers. So
they're opportunistic.
They will take the ball away from you. So sometimes don't get too caught up in what happens between the 20s. Now, with 26 points a game, teams are still finding their way to the end zone. But Sean Payton needs to find a way. This is a bad defense. Earlier this year, you played a high-powered offense with a bad defense in the Baltimore Ravens. And the problem there was you couldn't take advantage of the bad defense. You had overthrows. You had Lil Jordan Humphrey lets a ball bounce off his hands on the first drive. It's intercepted. Bo overthrows a couple touchdowns. Garrett Bowles gets a hold on what would have otherwise been, I think, a Bo touchdown run. And then you end up having this gap where you score, and then your offense isn't back on the field.
Well,
until the third quarter.
Went from 17-10 to 31-10. They ran 3 plays.
Yeah, and it's to that. It's as good as your defense was, they lit you up.
38-10, actually.
Yeah, they lit you up because you weren't taking advantage of the times that Lamar and Derrick Henry were sitting on the sidelines. So to go back to CU, how did Kansas beat CU? You just didn't let Shador on the field.
Right.
And with Joe Burrow in this game, reducing Joe Burrow's opportunities is probably the way to win this game. Even if you're punting, get 1 or 2 first downs first. Give your defense a rest. Take time, not a 22-second drive. Pin them back, flip the field. That ultimately will catch up to you. But again, if you're going 3 and out because you're throwing it deep 3 straight plays because you feel desperate when you don't need to feel desperate, which we've seen Sean Payton do, the Chargers game being an example, you're going to really run into problems really quick here. You've got to be sound, you've got to be smart, but you have to execute. You kind of offensively, everybody talks about the defense against Burrow. Offensively, you have to be perfect in this game if you want to counter what they can do offensively.
Yeah, and perfection, I mean, you're not going to be perfect, but you got to be perfect in big moments. You go back to that Ravens game. They're down 17-7. They're driving, and you're right. I think that was the drive that had the Bulls holding penalty. You make that 17-14. The announcers even said it at the time of like, Broncos went out of bounds or called a timeout with 40 seconds left. It's like, you don't want to do that. You want to score here right at the end of the half and not give Lamar Jackson and the Ravens a reasonable amount of time to go score. You end up having to settle for a field goal, give them 40 seconds. They go down in 2 plays and score. Now it's 24-10 at half. It should have been 17-10 at worst. Should have been 17-14. That was the moment the Broncos needed to be perfect. They needed to be perfect in terms of execution, and the Garrett Bowles holding penalty killed them. And they needed to be perfect in terms of clock management, and Sean Payton bungled it. One of the many times in his nearly 2 seasons here, he has mismanaged the end of the first half. He did it at Kansas City last year. He did it at the Chargers on Thursday.
New England.
He did it New England
end of the game.
Late in the game. That was a miss. He did it at Baltimore. Like, that is one where Will Lutz needs to be lining up to kick that field goal with 4 seconds left in the half. The Broncos should have never had to punt at the end of the first half and even made it a situation where something weird could come into play last week against the Chargers. You got to be perfect in those moments, those micro decisions, and they just weren't in that Ravens game, and it unraveled. You're playing against an offense that's, I think, more explosive than Baltimore, but similar in terms of, hey, they've got a quarterback who's an MVP candidate. If you make a couple of those mistakes at the wrong moment, this could snowball tomorrow and spiral into, oh my God, how's it 38-10? It was just 17-10. That's what they need to avoid, is those chances where it's like, hey, Bo, I don't expect you to go out duel Joe Burrow, but can you make those plays when it's crucial? And he didn't against Baltimore. The defense let him down. His coach let him down. You got to avoid those same things tomorrow.
That's a big one. It is. It's Cincinnati's offense looks different than Baltimore, but they're just as effective with how they can just suddenly you're on the ground getting kicked and you can't get up. And we saw it Christmas Day. I mean, the Texans had nothing. There's nothing they could do and Buffalo earlier this year against Baltimore when they front run. And the Bengals, to me, they're a little more consistent with how often they'll score as long as T. Higgins is out there. But that's kind of the big thing with Bo is, and another thing I come to talking about executing in the right spots, Sean Payton specifically, your second down play calling has to improve. If you're Sean Payton, he calls very poor plays on second down. Last week in the first half, he didn't. And the result was the Broncos had 3rd and 3, 3rd and 4, 3rd and 2. What did they have in the second half? 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9, 3rd and 11. And a game like this, get Bo in a situation to where when he has to execute in those big moments, it's 3rd and 4. And you can kind of do a few different things to throw him off versus 3rd and 11. He's going empty. Trey Hendrickson knows what they're doing.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be a key to it. And part of that is, and you mentioned it a little bit ago, even if the drive doesn't end in a score, it can't be a 3 and out and you're punting from your own 15-yard line and you're giving Joe Burrow and company a short field. If you don't score on a drive but you get a couple of first downs, you're punting from your own 45 and you're pinning them back and you're making the Bengals go 85 yards, 90 yards to try and score. Just based on the math of it, it's going to take longer, right? It's going to slow them down in terms of the overall total on the scoreboard. That will help. So you got to avoid mistakes. Don't give them a short field. If you turn the ball over and give them a short field, you're going to get run out of the barn.
Big time.
And you can't be doing 3 and outs. And this is a team that is improved as they've been offensively overall. They still struggle with that. At one point in the year, they were leading the league in 3 and outs. You can't be doing a bunch of that yet tomorrow. Yet worst case, you got to be flipping the field on drives. And then defensively, can you help your offense out a bit, right? Can you force a couple turnovers where it's a little bit like the Colts game where your touchdown drives are, it's a 15-yard touchdown drive. It was a 25-yard touchdown drive. Right. It's Nick Bonito picking off a trick play and putting 7 points on the board. It's like you look up and like, how'd the Broncos? They had less than 200 yards offense and they scored 30 plus. Yeah, because they had short drives and the defense scored. Gonna have to do some of that stuff if they're gonna be able to keep up with the Bengals tomorrow.
Yeah, you're not likely to get you're not likely to get an interception off Joe Burrow. Just maybe it happens.
And the weather makes that up.
It can make it, but they do fumble. They do fumble the ball in Cincinnati. And the way you're more likely to get a turnover off a Burrow is, a strip sack or something like that. But try to poke that ball away. It's going to be a wet ball. Be opportunistic with a lot of the things out there. And this Broncos defense, look, Bonito a few weeks ago, everybody's talking, defensive player of the year. You go out on Thursday night in front of everybody.
It disappeared.
And they disappeared. Jonathan Cooper, again, you got the contract. That's my big thing. I brought it up earlier, and I'll say it again. Elvis Dumervil sacks Joe Flacco. They don't ask him to take a pay cut after that year.
Right. It's the key moment, right? It doesn't really matter don't be Troy Tulowitzki and hit a bunch of ninth inning home runs down 7-0.
Yeah.
Right. What do you do in the ninth inning in a 2-1 game and two guys on? That's the Elvis Dumervil Joe Flacco moment. That's the Bo Nix down 17-7, trying to burn the end of the first half at Baltimore. Don't settle for a field goal with 40 seconds left. Like, that's the stuff you got to see.
Yeah, just be timely. And that's why the reason they beat Cleveland, as crazy and wild west as that game was, they were timely with their big plays. The Marvin Mims play, the defensive touchdowns. When it looked like Cleveland anytime, and Cleveland did get a lead, but anytime Cleveland got a lead or got close, the Broncos were able to come up with a big play to kind of steal that momentum back.
Well, and the Colts game, I think, is even a better example, right? It's the Nick Bonito. I guess technically it was a fumble return, but the pick six on the trick play. It was the Marvin Mims punt return that set up the 15-yard touchdown drive. Like, when you're not doing anything offensively, where else can you get a spark? They had guys be timely with making big plays. Who's going to do that tomorrow? Where's it going to come? Special teams, defense, even offensively. You mentioned the Marvin Mims touchdown against the Browns. Like, you got to have some of those moments. You got to have somebody be clutch and timely. Who's it going to be? Well, this is their biggest test, and I can't wait to watch it and see if anybody's ready for prime time, because they weren't against the Chargers. They just weren't. You had a 24-13 lead, and your offense disappeared, and your defense collapsed.
And coaching, execution, everybody just completely fell apart. And with that kind of going on, we're talking about being timely. By the way, I don't know why. The more we talk, and I'm not trying to go off track, the more we talk about Cincinnati's offense, I'm thinking about Corey Dillon and Peter Warwick running the ball all over us. Everybody talks about Corey Dillon. Remember, Peter Warwick took an end around, like 70 yards in that game. And that was a high-powered Bengals offense. But for the Broncos, it's something I've talked about this week. We're talking about being timely. And Marvin Mims, it was like, okay, that was pretty good. With the Bengals, we know where to look. Jamar Chase will make a big play. Joe Burrow make a big play. T. Higgins can make a big play. Trey Hendrickson can make a big play. Earlier this year when the Broncos played the Raiders in Vegas, Max Crosby single-handedly keeping the Raiders in that game. Who are the players on this Broncos team? And I don't know if I have an answer for this, and it's like, hey, I'm going to go make a play right now. Who's the guy that it's 3rd and 10? I'm going to sack this guy. I'm going to catch this touchdown. I'm going to convert this first down. Who's the Aiden Hutchinson? Who's the Amon-Ra St. Brown?
It's their two best defensive players, and they're both great players. Pat Surtain's a great player. All right, well, you're going to be they're not going to just not throw the ball to Jamar Chase. They're going to try to make a play, make a big play in a big moment. Nick Bonito, you've developed into a great player. Okay, making plays against the Browns and the Colts is one thing. And, when people are talking about his defensive player of the year, it's like, listen, if he had 3 sacks in the final 3 games, but it was 1-1-1, he's probably not going to win it. If he goes out and has 3 sacks against Justin Herbert and then has 0-0, he might win it because everybody's watching. Well, tomorrow's another opportunity. Go out and make a couple of big plays against Joe Burrow, and everybody's talking about that offense, and we've talked about it for 2 hours and 20 minutes, and you go out and sack him 3 times and force a couple of fumbles and make some big plays, you're in that conversation. Because you know what? When you watch the Steelers, TJ Watt has those kind of games on national TV where he's unblockable. Go be that. It's those 2 guys defensively because those are your stars. I don't expect Cody Barton to make a big play. He might, but I don't expect it. I expect in these kind of moments, Pat Surtain, Nick Bonito, make 2 big plays or make big plays because you're the 2 stars on that defense.
And that's what it needs to be. It needs to be nobody. You'll notice, and I get that I'm talking about playoffs and Super Bowl. When talking about the Panthers and when talking about the Patriots and the Broncos Super Bowl run, you'll notice anymore nobody really beats up the Patriots O-line or the Panthers O-line because everybody understands there was nothing you were going to do to stop Von Miller.
Yeah.
You could have put the whole offensive line on him. he was gonna put Tom Brady into the dirt. Have that be your game, Nick Bonito, where it's like, you want to chip me with a tight end? Bring it. I'm taking that guy down. And Pat Surtain, those rare occasions, because Joe Burrow, he's not stupid. And he knows back in the day, Tom Brady learned don't throw to Champ Bailey, and him and Peyton Manning just stopped doing it. Then Matt Leinart did it and got picked off twice because he's a rookie. But when Burrow gives you that chance, because there will be an arrogance to him and Jamar, they'll go after Pat Surtain at some point, make him pay.
Yeah, but exactly. And it's fine to be a great player across 17 games, and you've kind of padded your stats with big moments against, they played the NFC South and they played fine. Shut people like me up, right? They keep wanting to talk about that you're 1-6 against teams with a winning record. And the way you do that is your big-time players have to make big-time plays in big-time moments. I mean, the ultimate example, you just mentioned, it's Von Miller in Super Bowl 50, right? To some extent, it doesn't really matter what his career sack total is with the Broncos. That game, that playoff run, is going to get his name on the facade at Empower Field.
And a gold jacket.
Yeah, but if he puts up those other big numbers but doesn't have big moments in the playoffs, he's Simon Fletcher.
He's Elvis Dumervil.
Where it takes a long time to get up there because Simon Fletcher didn't go into Super Bowl 24 and sacked Joe Montana 3 times and helped the Broncos win that game. Right. It was just like, he didn't have a moment. Like, you got to have your moment. They got the opportunity tomorrow, so that's the beauty of it. They put themselves in this position. They had the opportunity last year on Christmas Eve against the Patriots. Russ had a tremendous rally, and it just came up short. That could have been a moment which changes the Russell Wilson narrative here in Denver.
He was great.
If
he was
pull
great
that off, right? 16 unanswered. You get back in the game. You get the ball back with 2:12 left. You go down and lead a game-winning drive. It's like, okay, that's clutch. It may be ugly, but the guy's clutch. They weren't able to quite make the play at that moment. Who's going to do it tomorrow? We've talked about defensively. It's the Bo Nix thing too, right? Like, great, you led the drive against the Chiefs, and everybody wants to say, oh, that was your moment, and yeah, it was your coming out party. You scored 14 points. You had 53 yards of offense in the second half. Again, 10 of which came before that final drive. Bo Nix is going to get the ball back every time after the Bengals score tomorrow. What do you do in those instances? Can you go toe-to-toe to some extent with Joe Burrow? Can you answer? Can you win a shootout? Can you go on the road in bad conditions and perform with the playoffs on the line? Again, naysayers like me who's like, I don't care what you do against the Raiders in November. What do you do with the playoffs on the line tomorrow? Go check that box.
And it is about the visual. Talking about the defense real quick, going back to the Simon Fletcher and everything, I always ask people, how many sacks do you think Von Miller had in the 2015 season?
10.
It was 10.
Yeah.
I think most people would like 14.
Yeah.
But it's like the visual was what it needed to be. And that's why Josh Allen is leading the MVP race right now. On paper, he's not as good as Joe Burrow or Lamar Jackson. But fourth down against Kansas City with the game on the line,
correct,
he rips it to the house.
Correct.
And going into Detroit, he's making it happen. They lose a game against the Rams, but he accounts for 6 touchdowns. And that's why it's with Josh Allen, I don't have to pull up the stats to see that he's playing great. Your eyes should tell you. So with Bo Nix, Jaden Daniels, this and that, Nick Bonito, let's not have to go look at the stat sheet after this game. Let's just be so hyped because what our eyes told us was that the big moment wasn't too big for you.
Yeah, I mean, and it'll put his sack total to a big number, but you're right. To some extent, that overall season number won't matter all that much. It's remember when he had those 3 sacks against Burrow to put him into the playoffs for the first time since Super Bowl 50? That's what's going to matter.
Yeah, is you got to get after that. James, we've had a little bit of back and forth. Is it just about making the playoffs? You get in, how you get